Cambyses, Memphis, Egypt. 525 BC, a king feasted on the flesh of his own son. The stench hit first, clotted blood, sour with rot, seeped into the stone floor. Flies buzzed, drunk on the warmth of spilled life, a golden platter. Once gleaming with lamb and figs, now held something darker, stripped bone. Muscle torn by human teeth. The courtiers stared, paralyzed, as the king chewed slowly. His eyes didn't blink. His jaw moved like a hinge in hell. In the corner, a servant vomited. Another wept. No one dared speak. The fire in the braziers crackled like bones snapping underfoot. Behind the curtain, something twitched a child's sandal, soaked in wine-red liquid. The room swelled with silence, heavier than screams. Cambyses licked his fingers. Whispers followed. A dish switched in the shadows. A servant vanished that morning. Or perhaps it was a punishment, or a rite. No one was sure, but something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. The boy's name was never spoken again, his body, never found. And Cambyses, once a king, now a shadow of fury and rot, began to tremble. There were rumors, of course. Poison, a curse, or worse, a lie buried so deep. It poisoned the throne itself. Who served the plate? Who gave the order? And what kind of father feasts without knowing what he consumes? The truth was swallowed that night, alongside the final bite. But tonight we dig it back up. The throne of Persia was still warm with the blood of Cyrus the Great when his son, Cambyses, stepped onto it. The courtiers bowed low, their faces pressed to marble, but not one dared meet his eyes, not because of fear, not yet, but because those eyes held something deeper than ambition, something colder than power. They said Cambyses was born beneath a crimson eclipse, in a night split open by thunder, that he came into the world screaming, fists clenched, as if already fighting ghosts only he could see. Cyrus, his father, had carved an empire from desert, stone, and fire. But Cambyses had not inherited a dream. He had inherited a burden. He sat on the throne not like a ruler, but like a prisoner. Each decree he signed felt more like a chain around his own throat. His breath was heavy, his gestures too sharp. Even the servants, trained to silence, sensed it. The prince had returned from his father's funeral with something broken inside him. He didn't mourn Cyrus. He never spoke his name. He ordered all images of his father removed from the palace halls. Statues were taken down. Coins were melted. The memory of the empire's founder was buried beneath a new weight, Cambyses' silence. At night, the palace changed. Shadows lengthened. Lamps burned lower. Cambyses would wander the colonnades barefoot, muttering. His guards followed at a distance, unsure whether to protect him or protect others from him. He gripped his dagger even in sleep. There were dreams, whispers, screams behind closed doors, and always, always the fear that someone was watching. He spoke of omens, of storms that arrived without clouds, of dogs that howled at midday. One morning, he struck a priest for lighting incense too slowly. Another, he ordered the whipping of a page boy who dared laugh. He watched the lashes without blinking. The boy never laughed again. Cambyses began to dress in darker robes. He wore a ring once belonging to a condemned traitor. He ordered his food tasted 3 times. Poison was a word he whispered like a prayer. The court became quieter. The laughter died. The music softened. Even the birds that once nested in the palace rafters seemed to vanish. Only one person dared speak to him with ease, his younger brother, Bardia. The two were once close. They trained together, hunted together. Bardia had the ease. Cambyses lacked the easy smile, the open hand. He was beloved by the guards, adored by the people, and Cambyses knew it. He watched his brother in the garden one afternoon, surrounded by soldiers who leaned in close to hear his words, their faces lit with laughter. Cambyses stood behind a column, fingers digging into the stone, blood blooming beneath his nails. He said nothing, but something shifted in him that day, like a stone tipping loose from a cliffside. He summoned his advisors that night. His voice was low, almost tender. "My brother is a good man," he said. No one spoke. "Too good." There was a silence so thick it swallowed breath. "A man like that," Cambyses whispered, "will be loved more than a king." A week later, Bardia was sent away on a royal tour of the eastern provinces. Cambyses watched the caravan leave from a high tower. He never waved. He only turned to the captain at his side and said, "Make sure he doesn't return." The captain nodded. No questions, no hesitation. That was the day Cambyses stopped looking at the sky and started listening to the walls. The desert wind howled like a warning. But Cambyses didn't hear it. His boots sank into Egyptian soil for the first time, and something in him tightened, as though the gods of the Nile themselves recoiled. Memphis loomed in the haze, white stone gleaming like bone beneath the sun. The air smelled of incense and sweat, and the streets held a strange silence, unnatural for a city so alive. Cambyses rode at the front of his army, cloaked in black, his face masked with dust and contempt. He did not come as a visitor. He came to conquer. The Egyptians stood behind their walls, waiting. Psammetichus III, the boy pharaoh, watched from the ramparts. His hands trembled. His face was still painted in the sacred gold of his ancestors, but the color had begun to run with sweat. Cambyses had studied him, a child ruling a dying land. He had brought more than soldiers. He brought something unthinkable. Cats, dozens of them, painted, roped, carried in cages of gilded bronze, mewing, hissing, sacred to the Egyptians, untouchable, divine. At Pelusium, Cambyses gave the order. Soldiers raised shields painted with feline faces. Others tied cats to their spears and breastplates. The front lines marched behind a wall of sacred life. The Egyptians faltered. Their arrows slowed, their hands hesitated. They could not strike, not without striking gods. And so they fell. The Nile ran red that evening. The sands drank deeply. Cambyses walked through the battlefield as if through a garden. He kicked a broken helm aside and stepped over the still-twitching corpse of a charioteer. Behind him, the cats scattered, vanishing into the reeds. He marched on Memphis when the gates finally opened. Cambyses did not celebrate. He spat on the threshold. The priests came forward, trembling, bearing gifts and olive branches. He struck one across the face. He declared himself pharaoh, but he would not rule as one. He would rule as a curse. Within days, he entered the temple of Ptah, demanding to see the bull Apis, a living god. When the priests hesitated, he roared like a wounded animal. They obeyed. The animal was led forth, its hide oiled, its eyes calm. Cambyses drew his dagger. The priests screamed. The guards held them back. The blade sank deep. Apis staggered, then fell. The temple echoed with wailing. Cambyses wiped the blood on his sleeve. He laughed. Later, he mocked the funerary rites, stood in the holy procession, and imitated the mourning with grotesque theatrical sobs. He walked among the tombs of kings and cracked open their sarcophagi, demanding to see the bones. He ordered ancient scrolls burned, statues toppled. The people whispered of sacrilege, of madness, but no one dared stop him. At night, he dined alone, surrounded by guards who would not speak. He stared into the fire for hours, his food untouched. Sometimes he whispered names no one recognized. His generals began to fear him. His advisors avoided his gaze. Even his horses, once loyal, now trembled at his scent. Something had changed in Cambyses, not just in his rule, in his soul. Egypt had not been conquered. It had been defiled. And in doing so, Cambyses had opened a door not just to empire, but to something darker, something that now walked with him. In every room, In every shadow and every mirror, the letter arrived in silence, bound in black wax, sealed with the royal crest. It bore no opening words, just an order, cold and final. Prexaspes read it twice beneath the flicker of an oil lamp. His hands, scarred from decades of swordsmanship, trembled in a way no battle had ever caused. He looked toward the tent flap, where the desert wind pressed the fabric like a breath held too long. Bardia was asleep, wrapped in a travel cloak, his face half buried in the furs. The younger prince seemed untouched by fear or suspicion. His chest rose and fell slowly, a man dreaming of home, perhaps, or of nothing at all. There was a calmness about him that made the night even crueler. Prexaspes stepped outside. The stars above Persia glimmered like cold iron, silent witnesses to what must come. He stared at the sky for a long time, hoping the wind would blow the memory away before it was ever made. But duty was heavier than grief. Inside the tent, Bardia stirred. "Can't sleep?" he asked, smiling faintly, his voice thick with the quiet trust of a brother's companion. Prexaspes did not answer. He poured wine. They drank. They spoke of horses, of campaigns past, of the strange red light that clung to the eastern mountains that evening. And when Bardia laughed a soft, real sound, Prexaspes looked down at his cup, unable to meet the eyes of a man already sentenced. When the blade came, it was quick. A whisper through the ribs, a gasp, half-spoken. Bardia's fingers clutched at nothing, reaching for a world already slipping away. There were no last words, only the sound of flesh meeting soil as his body was buried beneath the desert sands. No rites, no witnesses, no tomb. By dawn, Bardia was gone, and the silence that followed stretched across the empire like a wound that would never close. Cambyses never asked for confirmation. When Prexaspes returned, his face pale and lips tight, the king simply nodded. His eyes flicked to the dagger at Prexaspes' side. Then away. He poured himself a cup of wine and whispered, "Let no one speak of it again." But guilt does not sleep, and in the halls of Susa, shadows began to grow. There were murmurs. A servant saw the prince leave but never return. A general remembered a letter that never reached its destination. A concubine spoke of hearing Cambyses mutter his brother's name in the dead of night over and over, like a curse he couldn't lift. The silence became too loud. Cambyses began to see his brother in dreams, Bardia's face, bloodless and calm, hovering at the edge of torchlight. He would wake, drenched in sweat, convinced the walls were breathing. He shouted at his advisors. He struck his guards. He demanded new maps, new reports, searching for signs of rebellion of a ghost that would not stay buried. And then, one day, the ghost returned. A man appeared in the eastern provinces, wearing Bardia's face, speaking with his voice. He claimed to be the lost prince, spared by the gods, returned to restore justice. At first, Cambyses dismissed it, a charlatan, a local trickster playing with death. But then the provinces began to fall in line. One by one, cities pledged allegiance to the returned Bardia. Taxes were forgiven. Religious rites were restored. The people rejoiced. Cambyses' decrees were burned in the streets. He stopped sleeping. Every night, he sat alone. Maps sprawled before him, hands trembling, eyes rimmed red. The wine no longer dulled the ache. Every courier who entered his chamber brought with them a fresh slice of panic. Another province lost. Another noble defected. He shouted, "It's a lie." But no one dared reply. He summoned Prexaspes. "You killed him," Cambyses hissed. Tell them again." The old advisor bowed, face pale. "Yes, my king." Then why do they follow him? No one could answer that. And Cambyses began to wonder, had he failed? Had Prexaspes failed? Had Bardia survived, or worse, was this truly his brother? Returned from the earth, come to take back what was his. His hands would not stop shaking. He paced the halls like a caged animal. He wept in private, then emerged with a face carved from stone. His madness deepened, sharpened. He began executing those closest to him, one by one. Men who had served his father, men who once called Bardia friend. He found poison in his goblet, or thought he did. He ordered the wine steward's tongue cut out. The court grew silent, the air suffocating. Even the echoes seemed afraid to speak. And all the while, Bardia, or the man who claimed to be, marched closer, not with armies, but with the love of a people. Cambyses stood at the edge of a crumbling world, and the wind that once carried his father's legacy now carried only dust. His throne no longer felt solid, and somewhere deep inside him, beneath the layers of rage and steel, Cambyses began to understand. This was not just a rebellion. It was a reckoning, a judgment, a mirror held too close. The night began with silver and silk. Torchlight shimmered across the marble walls of the great hall, casting long shadows over rows of polished goblets and gold-rimmed platters. Musicians played something slow and ceremonial, their fingers stiff with unease. A scent of roasted meat floated in the air, spiced, unfamiliar. Cambyses entered last. His cloak dragged behind him like a trailing wound. His eyes were darker than usual, ringed with sleeplessness, and his hands trembled only slightly as he sat upon the throne-like chair at the head of the feast. He raised a goblet, not in toast, but as if warding something off. The guests were hand-picked generals, priests, advisors, each chosen for their silence, their obedience, or their fear. None knew why they had been summoned. Some smiled too much. Others kept their eyes low. All of them waited for the king to speak, but he did not. Instead, he nodded once, and the feast began. Servants in black emerged from hidden doors, carrying dishes wrapped in linens, one by one. They placed them upon the long table-glazed pheasant, seared lamb, baskets of figs soaked in wine. Then came a dish unlike the others round, steaming, covered in ornate silver. It was set before the king. Cambyses stared at it for a long time. No one moved. The room stilled except for a single musician, still plucking at a lyre string that had gone out of tune. Cambyses lifted the lid. Steam rose. A pale cut of meat lay on a carved wooden board, surrounded by dark herbs and thick red sauce. He leaned forward, inhaled. Something in his jaw tensed. Then he reached for his knife, carved a piece, and placed it into his mouth. The sound of his chewing was the only thing that moved through the hall. He swallowed, then took another bite. It was not until the third that a servant near the door began to weep. Barely audible, a broken sound, like a bird choking on ash. Cambyses looked up, blood at the corner of his lips. "What is it?" he asked, voice raw. "Speak." The servant dropped to his knees, trembled, tried to speak, failed. Persiaspes rose from his seat. His face was pale. His eyes met Cambyses, and for the first time, there was something in them that had never been there before. Horror. "What is this meat?" the king asked again, louder. Silence. Then, from the corner of the room, a second servant whispered, "My king, it is your son." The words did not echo. They simply dropped heavy. Final. Irreversible. Time cracked open. Cambyses stood so violently his chair toppled behind him. His hands shook. The knife fell to the ground with a cold clang. He looked at the platter, the half-eaten flesh, the red sauce now suddenly resembling something far more terrible. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He backed away. Some say he screamed, others say he collapsed. Some remember him clawing at his own face, trying to tear away the moment. But no one truly knows, because the room descended into chaos, a riot of disbelief, and prayer and fear. Guards dragged the servants out. Blood followed. Persiaspes did not speak. He simply walked to the door, one step at a time, like a man leaving a tomb. Cambyses did not eat again for 3 days. He locked himself in his chamber, surrounded by the scent of rotting food and burning incense. He spoke to no one. He paced the floor until the stone beneath his feet wore smooth. Some say he tried to vomit up the memory, scraping at his tongue with a dagger's edge. When he finally emerged, he was thinner, wilder, and something in his eyes had changed, no longer madness, but vacancy, as if the man inside had stepped back, leaving only the shell of a king behind. He ordered the hall where the feast was held to be torn down, brick by brick, torch by torch. No one was allowed to speak of it again. And yet, in the weeks that followed, his behavior grew more erratic. He struck a high priest across the mouth for a minor mispronunciation. He executed a cook because the bread was too soft. He banned mirrors from the palace, claiming they showed things that shouldn't be seen. At night, servants reported hearing him speak to someone in his chambers, sometimes pleading, sometimes laughing, but always alone. Rumors spread of a cursed meal, of a son betrayed, of a plot too dark to name. Some claimed it was a warning from the gods. Others believed it was vengeance, a punishment for fratricide, a reckoning for sacrilege. But none could explain the meat. No one knew the boy's name. No records existed of any son born to Cambyses, which only deepened the question, whose flesh had the king consumed? And why had it been served without protest? There was no trial, no investigation, only silence. And from that silence came a new kind of fear. For now, the madness had a shape. It walked beside the king, sat beside him in court, stared at him in every shadowed corner. And Cambyses no longer tried to escape it. He wore it, as if it were the only thing left that still obeyed him. There was blood on the steps of the palace again. Not fresh, not warm. It had dried in thin black ribbons beneath the sandals of the guards who no longer spoke to one another. The corridor stank of incense and fear. Both burned too often. Outside, the sky over Susa turned to let a heavy dome, pressing down on a kingdom holding its breath. Cambyses walked alone now. No procession, no advisors, only the sound of his own footsteps echoing through halls emptied by dread. His robes hung loose, his beard untrimmed. His once regal bearing had turned to a slow, twitching gait, shoulders hunched as if carrying the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. His fingers rubbed at the same spot on his wrist, again and again, where no wound had ever been. They said he barely slept. They said he whispered to walls, to fires, to shadows that moved when no one else did. And still he ruled. He signed edicts in the middle of the night. He ordered new taxes, then burned the scrolls before they could be delivered. He summoned priests and asked them to explain death, not its ritual, but its silence. When they failed, he screamed until his voice cracked, then ordered them buried alive. The court began to collapse around him. No one dared contradict. No one dared correct. Cambyses would stare too long, as if peeling thoughts from skin. He watched mouths move before he listened to words. His paranoia had become a doctrine. Every whisper was a plot, every gesture, a blade. It was not fear anymore. It was something rawer, hungrier. One morning, he walked into the grand hall and pointed at a stone pillar. "It listens," he said. He ordered it destroyed. When the workers hesitated, he had them flogged, then ordered a second pillar crushed, and a third. He spoke of tunnels beneath the floor, of traitors who breathed through the walls. His generals stopped sleeping in the palace. Even Prexaspes, once trusted, once loyal, avoided his gaze. Cambyses asked him, "Do you dream of Bardia?" Prexaspes flinched. "No, my king." "Liar," Cambyses whispered. "So do I." He laughed once, a hollow, broken sound that made even the guards reach for their swords. The ghost of his brother had returned in flesh, or so the people believed. From the east came word Bardia walked again, alive, whole, merciful. The name echoed across cities. whispered like salvation. Villages painted his face in oils. Markets sang songs in his name. Women wept at altars. Men kissed the ground where he was said to have passed. Cambyses ordered their tongues cut out. His throne now rested on fire. He stopped wearing the signet ring of Cyrus. He wore no crown. Some said he was preparing for war. Others said he was preparing for execution his own. He built a pyre of royal records, watched the pages curl and die. In the smoke, he claimed he saw the future. It was not kind. He gathered his captains. The man who calls himself Bardia, he said, is a magician, a shapeshifter, a lie. They nodded, but their eyes were heavy with something else, weariness, perhaps, or doubt. He pounded the table. I am the son of Cyrus. I am the blood of kings. Silence. And then a murmur. What if it is him? It wasn't said aloud, but it lived in the room like a slow, rising fog. Cambyses knew, he felt it. That fracture in loyalty, that shift. He called Persian again, this time. He did not whisper. Go, he commanded. Tell the court what you did. Tell them you killed my brother. Let them hear it. Let them remember it was by my order. Persian obeyed. He stood before the nobles, his voice slow and uncertain. I killed Bardia, he said. I struck him in the heart. I buried him with my own hands. But even as he spoke it, the room felt colder, and the whispers returned. What if he lied? What if Bardia lives? The body was never found. Cambyses watched his kingdom turn from fear to doubt, from silence to defiance. The people did not rally. They slipped away, one by one. Temples reopened in the name of Bardia. Tax collectors were turned away. Scribes refused to carve Cambyses' name. The empire, once a hammer in his hand, now dissolved like sand between his fingers. He rode out. One night. Alone. No guards. No standard. Just a torch and a blade. He went to the edge of the city, where the statues of old kings watched the wind. There, he sat for hours, eyes wide, mouth unmoving. Some say he spoke to his father's ghost. Others say he waited for Bardia to come and finish the work. When he returned, something was different. His voice had lowered, his hands steadied. But his eyes were empty. The next day, he executed 2 of his own advisors for disloyal posture. No trial, no words, only the sudden fall of a blade. The heads were left in the courtyard for days. Birds pecked at them. Children stopped walking past, and Cambyses watched from the balcony, unmoving. It was no longer paranoia. It was prophecy. A kingdom ruled by a man who no longer believed in anything except his own unraveling. And in the center of it all, a throne, still warm, still bleeding, and utterly alone. The wind over Syria carried the scent of ash and iron. Cambyses rode at the front of a thinning column, no banners, no songs, only dust rising in tired clouds behind them. His armor, once polished to a king's gleam, now bore streaks of rust and flaking blood. His face was gaunt, blistered by sun and silence. He hadn't spoken in days. The road back to Persia felt longer than the conquests ever had. Behind him, his soldiers rode without formation, their eyes low, mouths dry. Some had begun to speak Bardia's name again softly, like a prayer to something already half real, half divine. No one sang of Cambyses. No one dared meet his eyes. He dismounted at dusk. The army set camp at the base of a red stone hill, where scrub trees clawed at the wind and the horizon trembled under a storm not yet formed. Cambyses walked alone beyond the fires, his boots crunching dry underbrush. He stared into the fading light, as if searching for something lost long before this journey began. And then it happened. A stumble. His foot caught on a root, or perhaps nothing at all. His body twisted, and as he fell, the scabbard at his waist snapped a brittle crack, and the blade within drove straight into his own thigh. There was no scream, only a breath caught in the throat. Then the slow collapse of a man who had stood taller than empires. The wound bled fast, hot, too hot. His men found him slumped against a stone, his fingers slick with his own blood, eyes glassy but awake. They called for a physician. They built fires higher. They whispered of poison, of gods, of justice. Cambyses did not speak for hours. Then, finally, he asked for Prexaspes. The old man came, face pale, hands shaking. He knelt beside the dying king, unable to meet his gaze. Cambyses stared up at the dark sky. "I killed him," he said. Prexaspes whispered, "We know." But Cambyses shook his head, weakly. "No, not the man they follow. That man, I don't know who he is." Prexaspes said nothing. "I buried Bardia," Cambyses muttered. "And yet he walks. Or someone does. Maybe the gods are laughing." He coughed wet, rattling. Blood slipped from his lips. Or maybe they never needed me. A silence fell between them. Cambyses turned his head toward the firelight, where shadows moved like dancers with no rhythm. "You think it was an accident?" he asked. Prexaspes didn't answer. Cambyses smiled. It was not joy. The sword was mine. The wound, mine. The throne never was. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, the wind stilled. They say he died before dawn. Others say he lingered muttering names, some real, some not. A boy's name, a brother's, his father's, perhaps even his own. Though by then, it meant nothing. When the sun rose, the camp was silent. His body was wrapped in linen and salt. No grand funeral, no procession, just a shallow grave, miles from any city that bore his name. And as the final stones were laid, the first news arrived from Persia. The man claiming to be Bardia had taken the capital. He sat the throne without bloodshed. He opened the temples. He pardoned those Cambyses had imprisoned. The people cheered. They wept. They believed, but not all. In the shadows of court chambers, rumors flickered like candle flames, whispers that Bardia had died long ago, that this new ruler was not royal, but a magician named Gaumata, a usurper cloaked in stolen skin, a man playing king on borrowed time. The nobles conspired. Among them, one rose Darius, a distant cousin of Cambyses, a soldier with sharp eyes and a mind forged in silence. He had watched everything, waited, and now he struck. Gaumata, if it was him, was dragged from his palace and executed in the dark. His blood joined that of so many others who wore crowns too easily. Darius claimed the throne, and he wrote the story. He carved it in stone, high on the cliffs of Behistun. He told of Cambyses the mad, the blasphemer, the fratricide. He named him cursed. He made him warning, and the people believed that, too. But truth is harder to bury than kings. It lingers in the dust of a lonely battlefield, in the cracked scabbard of a fallen ruler, in the empty eyes of a man who watched an empire slip through his fingers. Cambyses left no heirs, only questions, and a legacy soaked in blood. Silence, and the slow, quiet terror of a man who could no longer tell whether the voices he heard were his enemies or his own. The road where Cambyses fell was never marked. No monument, no inscription, just a curve in the dust where a king once bled out alone. Far from the palace he could no longer command. The empire did not mourn. It turned, quickly, as empires do, toward the next voice, the next face, the next story. And yet, sometimes, at dusk, when the wind shifts across the plains of Syria, travelers speak of a figure standing motionless by the horizon, a man cloaked in black, face hidden, watching something that isn't there. No one approaches. No one calls out. They keep walking. Some say it's a ghost. Others say it's regret, given shape. In Persepolis, the marble throne was recut, the scrolls rewritten. Bardia's name was scraped from the stone. Cambyses was called mad, called cursed, his memory sewn shut with silence and stone. But the story never really left. It clung to the corners of the empire like a stain that wouldn't wash out. The feast, the blade, the brother buried in whispers. No one could prove it. No one could forget it. And in that silence, he remained. A man who inherited a crown and turned it to ash, who walked so deep into power, he forgot the way back, who ate a meal he could never digest. In the dark, long after the courtiers had gone and the torches had burned out, someone once found a single object left on Cambyses' deserted throne, a silver plate, empty, but still stained, and beneath it, carved with a trembling hand, one line, unfinished. "Tell them I was still hungry."